Next, what I'd like to do is add some JPA capability. JPA stands for the Java Persistence API. And if I want to deal with a database in Enterprise Java, I probably want to do it with JPA. The way I use this with Spring Boot is I simply add the Spring Boot Starter JPA dependency. What this will do is it will add Spring JDBC, it will add transaction management, it will add Spring ORM, it will bring in Hibernate and as the entity manager because, again, Spring Boot is an opinionated approach. Our opinion is Hibernate is a really good tool to use. What if you don't want to use Hibernate? What if you want to use Eclipse Link or OpenJPA? No problem. Just override the Hibernate and bring in the jars that you want. Now, it's also going to bring in the Spring Data JPA project, which is something I'm going to explain in just a second. One thing that Spring Boot Starter Data JPA does not bring in is a database driver because we have no idea what type of database that you want to use. So typically you add one manually. In the example, I'm going to use HSQL. Now, in that last slide, I mentioned something about Spring Data JPA. Spring Data JPA is another really neat area of technology in Spring. It's actually not part of Spring Boot. It's something else entirely. Now, if you take a look at a typical web application architecture, such as that which you see here on the right, you see I have controllers and services and DAOs and kind of a structured, layered architecture here. And my controllers are returning JSON and XML, and my DAOs are usually talking to a relational database. The REST controllers provide the CRUD interface to the clients, and the DAO is providing the CRUD interaction with the database. Well, what happens is a lot of times the code in the DAO is very, very predictable. Update this, delete this, insert that. What Spring Data JPA does is it allows us to automatically implement the box that's in yellow there, the DAO layer. We can actually have Spring Data create instant repositories for us. Spring Data provides what is called dynamic repositories. The way it works is you provide the Java interface and Spring Data will dynamically provide the implementation. Now, this is opposite of the way most frameworks work. Usually the framework provides the interface and you provide the implementation. Here it's the other way around. You provide the interface and Spring Data will implement it for you. So there's a lot less code that you have to write. And there are Spring Data specific subprojects for JPA, for Mongo Database, for Gemfire, etc. If you want to learn more about Spring Data, open a browser, Spring Data, go to the Spring Data projects on Spring.io, and you can see here the different projects. There's Spring Data JPA, there's Spring Data MongoDB, Spring Data Neo4j, Spring Data Solr, Spring Data Redis. You see where this is going. Spring Data provides different implementations for the different types of technologies that are out there. And so what happens here in this case is the service layer and the controllers usually wind up with having almost no logic in them. So let me go ahead and give you a demonstration about adding Spring Data JPA to our little project here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add the starter, Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. I'm going to add a dependency for HSQLDB to serve as my database. HSQLDB is in memory. Then I'm going to annotate my domain objects with some JPA annotations. And then I'm going to create what's called a CRUD repository. So first let's go to my POM here and let me add another dependency. Data JPA. That's going to bring in a number of other dependencies. Next, let me go to my team object and let me add some JPA annotations. Need to provide an ID. Now these annotations that I've just added are standard JPA annotations. If you'd like to learn more about exactly what I'm doing here, this is JPA and it's outside of the scope of this course. JPA has been out for quite a while, and these annotations are pretty standard JPA annotations. Let me go ahead and add some annotations to the player. So now my team and my player are annotated with JPA annotations. I almost forgot the other dependency that I need to add in here while I'm adding in the JPA. I should have done this before, I apologize, is I should have put in the HSQL database. The group ID I happen to know is org.hsqldb, and the artifact I just happen to know is hsqldb. Now, one thing I didn't really mention before is you notice I haven't been putting in any versions for any of these dependencies. That's because the versions are all defined for me by the parent POM. I only need to specify a version if I need to override the version, which I usually don't need to. Usually I want the most up-to-date stable release. Now the next thing I need to do is create some repositories here. So I'll create another package here. I don't have to create another package, I just want to. For my data access objects. And I'll create a new interface. Now this is not a class, this is an interface. I'm going to call this my team DAO. And my team DAO, what I want to do is I want to have it extend CRUD repository. Now CRUD repository is part of the Spring Data JPA library. It is a typed interface, and I'm required to tell it what data type this repository serves, and I'm also required to tell it what the type of the key is. So the data type that this is going to be for happens to be for team, and the serializable type of the primary key happens to be a long. That's it. Now the interesting thing is that with Spring Data JPA, I can actually add some function signatures that will automatically be implemented for me. As long as I follow a certain naming convention, certain methods will be implemented for me. So for example, if I were to say find all, that returns a list of team objects. Spring Data is going to know how to implement that method for me. Okay? It's also going to know how to implement a method that follows a signature like team find by name. The player object happens to have a field called name. So when I have a method called find by name, Spring Data JPA will automatically implement that with a logic necessary to go look up something by a specific name. Now to do the rest of my demo here, I need to move some of my logic here. I want to take this logic that I created here in my, my controller. I need to move it someplace else. I'd like to move it back to my application class. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to actually save this data someplace. The neat thing about those repositories is I can create a dependency of type team DAO, and I can auto-wire it. Now once I have this auto-wired, one of the things that I can do is I can call its methods. I can say team DAO dot save, and I can simply pass in the object that I want to save. And you're going to see that this is going to have the effect of saving my team and the players on the team in one simple movement. Now back on my controller, I'll do something similar. I will have a team DAO, and I will auto-wire it. And what I'll do instead of returning a hard-coded team, what I'll do is I will go to my team DAO, and I will say find by name. And how about if I put that name back in here? That name variable that I had from the previous example. In fact, I'm going to change this to be teams slash, and let's have the name back in here. And I'm going to have a path variable. Shouldn't have taken it out from before. So now my URL will be teams, and then I'll pass in the name that I'm looking for, and if this logic works, the find is going to go look that up, return it, and it's going to be turned into a JSON response or XML response. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a shot. I didn't see the server restart, so I'll restart it manually. And while that's starting, I'll go ahead and go over to my demo here, and I'll ask for teams slash peanuts. And there is my output. It happens to be in XML, but I could easily ask for this in JSON format. And there you have it. So what just happened here? A lot of things happened, but mostly Spring is doing most of the work. What I did is I added dependencies for the Spring Boot Starter JPA and one for the HSQL database. I annotated the domain objects with regular old JPA annotations that we've had with us for the last 6 or 7 years, and I created an interface for Spring Data JPA, and I dependency injected that into a controller. Now, when the application started, Spring Data dynamically implements the repositories that it finds. So it implements find methods and delete methods and save methods. I didn't implement the save method. I didn't even define the save method. It was provided for me. And all the data source and transaction management, all those beans that I used to have to define myself, they were all handled for me automatically. If I want to, I can override those bean definitions by creating my own, but it's nice that Spring just provides one for me automatically.